Hey there, AP Art History students. My name is Mr. Bruns. I'm going to talk to you about AP Art History and what this exam entails. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is the exam construction. Now, the exam is divided into two parts, okay, and it's 50-50. So the first part is the multiple choice, in which you have 60 minutes to answer 80 multiple choice questions. Now, we have in art history, we have what's called the 250, and the 250 represents the major works of art that you have to know. You have to know this. You have to be able to give the title, who was the artist, if it is known at that time, and the date that it was created, particularly in the century or in the time frame. And then you have to know the medium and or the material that it's made of, and then you have to know what culture created it and the culture around that, and the art historical period. Was it Impressionism? Was it Post-Impressionism? And then the location of certain pieces of architecture. And you even need to know the location of the work of art. So a big part of that a multiple choice section is vocabulary. You've got to do vocabulary. And I want to tell my students that they need to do is get 3x5 note cards, and you get a big shoebox. And what they're going to do then is every time we do a vocabulary word, you're going to write that vocab word down, and on the other side, you're going to have the definition and maybe a couple pieces of art that are great examples. Then after you're done with the multiple choice section, you get a little bit of a break, they're going to get you to part 2. And this is our free response question. Okay, so we're now all done with our multiple choice questions, and we're going to now get into part 2. And this is going to be your essays. And again, this is 50% of the overall exam. And this is kind of important. So there's a lot of writing, and a lot of kids don't get this. You got 120 minutes. That's 2 hours. So the total exam is 3 hours long. So we're going to go 2 hours of writing. And we're going to start off with essay number 1. Now, our essay number 1 is going to be about 35 minutes long, and this is what we call our comparative essay. And you'll get one work of art from the 250. Again, that's why it's important. You got to read, and you got to read to remember. And you will need to compare that work of art to a similar themed work of art. So if I can have like mother and child, well, I might compare that with another mother and child down a later time period, okay? And examples of the comparative analysis might be sort of like religious works. Compare this religious work to this religious work. Or rulers. How is Charles II's painting similar or different to, say, Louis XIV? We might compare structures. We might say, well, how is like the de Medici Palace compared to, I don't know, the Flavian Amphitheater, also known as the Colosseum? We might want to compare still lifes. We might compare portraits. And you know what? The list can go on and on and on. And you will need to make sure that you are supplying at a baseline minimum 2 identifiers when you're doing these sort of comparative analyses. So vocabulary is critical, and I've said this before, you've got to know that vocabulary. You got to know what chiaroscuro is, and tenebrism, and what is atmospheric perspective, and linear perspective, and hierarchy scale. Those are the things that you got to know, and you got to be able to make those connections. And when you write your comparative analysis, you've got to make sure that you aren't writing like, I don't know, here's a paragraph about this particular work of art, and here's another paragraph, but you don't do any comparing and contrasting. When you compare and you contrast, you're saying things like, here's A and B, and they're similar because they demonstrate this characteristic. And if we're contrasting, you want to say A and B are different because A does this and B does that, and it's important to know those things. So make sure you are doing true compare and contrast. Question is a 25-minute question. So question number 1, 35 minutes. Question number 2 is 25 minutes. And this FRQ is going to deal with visual and contextualization of the essay. And this can be from any time period, so be prepared. In the last few AP exams, we've seen some pieces that are coming from the contemporary world, that global contemporary, but we've also seen works of art come from Japan. So you've just got to be simply prepared. You could be asked anything. You could be asked about, contemporary installation pieces, and you need to identify the title, the artist, the medium, And you need to be able to discuss, what is the meaning behind this installation? What is the meaning behind this work of art? How did the artist deliver that meaning? Was it through the material? Was it through their technique? Was it through the site that they chose? And so in that visual and contextualization, you need to understand, why did the artist do it? Why did they place it there? What was the intent of that? And that's going to be your second FRQ essay. Out of the 35-minute essay, the 25-minute essay, and now we're really going to get into the sprints now. And these are what we call the 15-minute essays. Again, this is all part of the 120 minutes you get. There's nobody going to be standing there over your shoulder going, all right, you should be starting that 15-minute FRQ number 3. It's all within that bank of time. So it's important to have some sort of time reference, be looking at the clock or something like that, or bring yourself an old school digital watch and put it in front of you so you know how your time is playing out. So now we're going to get into question number 3, and this is going to be visual analysis. And this is, you're going to analyze a work that's going to be based on the principles of art history. And again, a lot of these principles of art history are taught to you. You need to be taking notes. You need to be doing the reading. I know I'm saying this a lot, but you got to do it. Now, this can come from the 250 or something that looks a lot like the 250. You're going to connect the work to our historical process. You're going to connect it to, say, like the Renaissance, or you're going to connect it to the Protestant Reformation, or you can connect it to the French Revolution. And you're going to analyze at least two elements more into question number 4, and this is the contextual analysis. And you're going to put a work of art in the context of the time it was created. For example, say we look at The Death of Marat by David. And why was that created? Well, it was created during the French Revolution. It was kind of created right around the time of the Reign of Terror, and all the people are getting guillotined at that time, and 40,000 Parisians are going to die, and Maximilien Robespierre is going to come to power. So we need to have some contextualization that surrounds the creation of that work of art. And sometimes the visual elements will intertwine, and it's okay to discuss those visual elements within the context of that work. Sometimes context is going to include the patronage. Who wanted this work to be created? Oh, because they wanted to show how fine a ruler they were. What's the function of this piece? Was, if the church asked for it, what's the function? Is it to make, to remind people about being pious, about being good, about original sin, those types of things. The stylization, the materials that were used, the techniques, where was it located? All of these are examples of contextual analysis. And so at the end, when you're kind of going through your art history class, remember to practice, what are examples of Byzantine? What is examples of Impressionism? What was going on around the history at that time? What was going on during the Gothic era? What about Qin Dynasty? What about the Meiji Restoration? These are all elements that kind of play into the contextualization of why art attribution. And this is probably one of the most difficult of the FRQ series. And the reason it's difficult, it's not because it's 15 minutes, and it's not because it's worth 5 points. It's because you're being asked to identify an image on a work that you've never seen before. So you're going to attribute that work to a particular culture or to a particular artist. So we AP art history teachers, what we try to do is that we're going to try to show you more than just the 250. We're going to try to show you many, many more works of art. So your 250 grows to about 400 works of art. And what you have to do is you have to look at the visual elements, or you can look at it and go, oh, I know what culture created that. And you have to give at least 2 examples to support your attribution, and make sure you're correct on that culture, or make sure you're correct on that artist, because if you don't get it correct, well, then your essay's just sunk. FRQ number 6 is called the change and continuity over time. Now, if you've taken AP World History, AP European History, or AP US History, you might already have a leg up on the idea of what a CCOT essay is all about. Art does change over time, but it has a long-standing tradition, such as, say, a portrait of a woman. And you might look at a work of art, say, like the Mona Lisa, and you might see another image from a Fauvist, and it might be Lady in Hat. Well, they are portraits of women, and that is the long-standing tradition. But how are they different? How did it change over time? What is the continuity of those two works of art? Is it the way that the shoulders are turned? Is it the way the head is tilted? Those are the continuities, but it's the stylization and how the artist presented the work that is the change. And the portraiture of a woman is another continuity over time and what changed about it. And so you have to be aware that art changes over time, but things stay. The bigger picture stays the same. You could have like a woodcut print, and you could have an Albrecht Dürer woodcut print, and then you might have somebody down in the 20th century who's done a woodcut. Well, the tradition is woodcut, but how did it change over time? How did the message change over time? And again, this is your last FRQ, and you're really working on about one brain cell by the time you get to this FRQ. So that's it, and you're done with your FRQs. Yay! So to remind you, part 1 of the exam is that you will have 80 multiple choice questions. You will have 60 minutes to complete those multiple choice questions, and you've got to know the name of the artist. You need to know the name of the work. You need to know the period or the movement of a work. You need to know the medium and or the material of that work. It's essential to know the date of the work. It's absolutely essential in architecture to know the location of particular works. And for paintings and sculptures, it's not necessary because works have been moved to museums. You need to identify key figures in the work. That's absolutely essential. And art history vocabulary, you have got to know it. You've got to sometimes even know who might have influenced an artist, or how does the work fit and doesn't fit in its time frame. What was the original setting of the work? Who was the patron? Sometimes that becomes important. And is there symbolism found within that work of art or the subject matter? And finally, keep up with those key formal characteristics, so sort of like rules or conventions that surrounded the creation of that work of art. And you should do pretty well in your multiple choice section. Part 2, you're going to have your free response questions. You're going to have that 35-minute essay of comparisons of works of art. You're going to examine similarities and differences between two works of art. You're then going to move on to your 25-minute essay, which is your interpretations. You're going to be able to describe the relevant interpretations of a work of art. And many of those might even change over time. Then you get into your 15-minute FRQs, and you might have a visual analysis of an unknown work of art, and you're going to be, able to apply methods of analysis to a work that you may have seen or not seen before. And then you're going to go to your next one. You're going to talk about the history around the work of art, that contextualization. That's your 4th FRQ. And then you're going to get to your attribution. That's going to be the one that's going to really challenge you quite a bit. And that's going to be able to attribute a work of art to a period, to its artist, its style, by relating it to a work from the image set. And you should be able to justify your attribution. And then finally, you get to that one, that artistic traditions that change in continuity over time, and explain how a given work of art is typical of an artistic tradition and also expands upon the traditions. It moves out past it, how it changed.